Greg could almost feel the nervous energy radiating from Brenda as they pulled into the parking lot of the community center. It was a plain building with beige walls and a single row of windows at the front. He had visited it a few times in the past for neighborhood gatherings, but this was different. Brenda was scheduled to attend her first anxiety support group, and he wanted to accompany her to show that he was there every step of the way. They had been married for 6 years, both of them in their early 30s, and they had grown comfortable in each other's presence. He could see, though, that lately her stress had become a constant pressure. She had made the courageous decision to join a support group, and Greg was more than happy to come along, even if he felt out of his depth. "I'm so jittery," Brenda said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never been around a bunch of strangers just to talk about, problems. It's different from going to therapy alone." Greg shut off the engine and looked at her. "You'll do fine," he said gently, placing a hand on her knee. "I'll walk you to the door. If you want, I can even wait inside. Maybe there's a waiting area or something. I'll stay close in case you need me." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thanks. I'm scared I'll say something stupid, or they'll judge me. I don't even know exactly what to expect. It's just so daunting." He leaned in, pressing a light kiss to her temple. "You've got this. We're just a bit early, so we have time. Let's get inside and see where we need to go. There's no rush." They climbed out of the car and walked toward the building's entrance, passing through a set of squeaky doors. The hallway had off-white tiled floors and a large bulletin board filled with flyers, yoga classes, cooking lessons, small concerts for the neighborhood's residents, and of course the various support groups. Brenda's was supposed to meet in room 102. Greg's eyes scanned the corridor until he spotted the sign for room 100 and guessed that 102 would be nearby. Brenda clutched her purse. "Can you walk me there?" she asked. "I just need a second to catch my breath." He nodded and guided her gently by the elbow. "Of course. Let's see." They walked down the hallway, passing door after door. Each room had a small window set into it, and a number nailed onto the frame. He was looking for 102, but just as they approached, a voice from behind called out, "Hey, Brenda!" They turned to see a woman who must have recognized Brenda from somewhere. The woman asked if Brenda had a moment to talk about the sign-in sheet. Greg, not wanting to crowd his wife, stepped away. "Go ahead," he said softly. "I'll find your room and wave you over in a minute." Brenda left with the woman, the two of them comparing notes on the form she needed to fill out. Greg ambled on his own, eyes shifting between the numbers above each door. When he saw a plaque labeled 102, he noticed there were a few people heading inside. He was glad Brenda would have a decent turnout for her first group meeting. Sometimes small groups could feel intimidating. However, he was momentarily distracted by a text popping up on his phone. It was a work-related message from a colleague. He slowed down to reply quickly, mind half on the text, half on the corridor around him. Without fully paying attention, he spotted a room with its door partially open. Assuming it was 102, he slipped inside, figuring he would let Brenda know the correct room was right there and find a seat for a minute. Once inside, he realized that the session had already begun. The chairs were arranged in a circle, and maybe a dozen people were seated. A few heads turned in his direction, and he felt the blood drain from his face the instant he noticed something he hadn't quite expected. Most of the attendees were wearing feminine clothing. Some were in blouses and skirts, some wore makeup, and at least one person had a wig that looked professionally styled. The calm, welcoming expressions in the circle contrasted sharply with Greg's sudden sense of alarm. He panicked, though his first instinct was to act polite. He froze, glancing quickly at the sign posted next to the door's frame. It read something completely different than anxiety support. His heart hammered. "This isn't the right group," he thought in a flash of panic. Oh no, this is something else." He found himself in the midst of a cross-dressing support meeting. A short hush fell on the circle as he stood there, uncertain. A tall person with a soft voice, likely the group leader, lifted a hand in a gentle wave. "Hello," they said warmly. "Are you joining us tonight?" Greg felt his tongue glue itself to the roof of his mouth. He wanted to back out slowly, to slip away without causing any sort of fuss. In his mind, he was already composing a quick apology. "I'm sorry, wrong room. I'm actually looking for the anxiety group." But his words never quite managed to emerge. He tried to speak, but then the leader smiled kindly and gestured to an empty chair. "Feel free to sit," they continued, clearly noticing his unease. "You're not late. We just finished going around once. Take a seat if you like." Greg hesitated, but something about their invitation, spoken without judgment, made him flush. He thought about how silly he would look turning around and sprinting out like he was scared. He didn't want to be rude to a group of people who had done absolutely nothing wrong. With cheeks going pink, he nodded and said in a small voice, "Thank you." He moved toward the circle, feeling as though every step carried him deeper into new territory. His heart still pounded, but in an attempt to remain polite, he tried not to show just how disoriented he felt. In that room, each attendee was dressed in a different style. Some looked as though they had just come from a business meeting, wearing neat slacks or pencil skirts, their shirts carefully pressed. Others wore casual dresses or even jeans with feminine-cut tops. Subtle makeup adorned some faces, bolder eyeshadows on others. Greg found a seat at the edge of the circle. His eyes darted around, noticing that each person seemed at ease with the arrangement of chairs and the conversation. Although a few stole curious looks at him, nobody seemed hostile or suspicious. In fact, many nodded politely, as though to reassure him that he was welcome. He wasn't sure how to extricate himself from the situation. The polite side of him felt it would be rude to stand up, say, "Whoops, sorry," and bolt. Even so, he guessed Brenda might be waiting if she finished dealing with her sign-in sheet. But the tall group leader was already speaking again, addressing the entire circle with a soothing tone. "All right," said the leader. "We've heard from a few folks already. Would anyone else like to share how their week went?" A person wearing a floral blouse cleared their throat and began recounting how they had found an old stash of clothes from years ago and decided to finally give them away. "I realized I didn't need them anymore," they said. "They reminded me of a time when I was more worried about how people would see me. I think I've grown more comfortable with where I am now. It feels nice not to hold on to those old fears." Greg listened. Despite his initial shock, he began to sense the genuine atmosphere in the room. Everyone seemed supportive of each other. The conversation flowed from one person to another. The words were calm, occasionally emotional, and always honest. Different experiences were shared about wearing certain clothes in public, about close relatives who either encouraged or frowned upon them, about how simple items of clothing could spark joy or anxiety, depending on the situation. As Greg sat there, he felt like he had invaded something intimate, but the sense of acceptance he saw in their expressions surprised him. Their stories were raw, difficulties of living day to day, the relief in dressing in a way that felt right, the fear of rejection. He felt his chest tighten when a participant described how they'd had a panic attack the previous week, afraid to step out onto the sidewalk while wearing a skirt. "I kept telling myself," the participant said, fiddling with the rings on their fingers, "if someone sees me, what if they mock me or point fingers at me? But I realized after a while that most people are so busy with their own day, they barely notice. And if they do notice, a lot of them don't really care. I was able to gather the courage to go out for a walk in my favorite outfit, and no one said a word about it." In the circle, a quiet patter of applause arose, and Greg found himself clapping too, a bit self-conscious but still touched by the story. He noticed an older gentleman, probably in his 50s, with neatly painted nails, describing how he'd learned makeup techniques through online tutorials. "I used to be hopeless with eyeliner," he said with a little laugh. "But then I found some videos that made it easy enough for me to follow. After a few tries, I could actually make the lines look even on both eyes. That was a victory, let me tell you." Laughter rippled through the group, and Greg's lips twitched into a smile. He never expected to find himself in a room like this, feeling unexpectedly relaxed by the quiet camaraderie. A small voice in his mind acknowledged that he, too, had sometimes wondered what it might feel like to try on certain clothes that weren't typically worn by men. He had never admitted it out loud, not even to Brenda. It was such a tiny flicker, barely a conscious thought, usually dismissed as soon as it appeared. Yet, listening to these individuals speak about the freedom and the warmth they found, he felt something stir. It was an unsettling sensation, a mixture of curiosity and a little jolt of excitement. His cheeks felt warm, and he reminded himself he had walked into the wrong room by mistake. Any second now, he thought, I should politely excuse myself. But for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, he stayed. He let the voices wash over him. One person described an upcoming family gathering and the uncertainty about what to wear. Another spoke about a spouse's reaction that had been supportive, while someone else hinted at an argument with a partner who didn't understand. They shared frustrations and hopes, hearing each other out without judgment. As the meeting continued, the group leader directed a gentle question at Greg. "Would you like to introduce yourself?" He swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. This was it, the moment he should say, "I'm sorry, there's been a mix-up. I'm not supposed to be here." But under their kind gaze, with so many pairs of eyes on him, he found himself reluctant to rush out and risk embarrassing them or himself. Sure," he murmured. "My name is Greg. I'm new here, I kind of stumbled in." He hoped they would let it slide, but the leader only nodded kindly, waiting for him to continue. Greg decided to offer something, even if it was vague. "I'm not exactly sure what to say, but I appreciate you letting me sit and listen. I'm here, by accident, to be honest. But I'm glad I got to hear some of your stories." A gentle hum of understanding circulated around the circle. Nobody pressed him for more details. It was as though they respected his choice to speak or not speak. The group leader simply said, "Thank you for being here. We hope you'll feel comfortable, even if you only stay for tonight." Greg nodded, grateful. He exhaled carefully, aware that his pulse was still racing. After that, the conversation drifted to lighter topics, from makeup brands to an upcoming potluck the group was planning. Greg tried to keep track of time, worrying about Brenda. He realized she might already be in her support group. Maybe she was wondering where he disappeared to. But something about the atmosphere in this cross-dressing group lulled him into a strange calm. He wanted to soak in more of the stories. Eventually, the session wound down. The leader concluded with a few announcements about next week's meeting. Everyone started gathering their bags, hugging or shaking hands. Greg stood, mentally rehearsing his exit. A couple of attendees smiled and said goodbye to him, making him feel oddly welcomed, despite the weird circumstances of his arrival. He managed to slip out before anyone asked for an email or phone number. The corridor was quiet. Down the hall, he spotted the actual room 102 sign. He realized with a rush of guilt that Brenda's group had been behind that closed door. He rushed over, only to discover that her session had also ended a few minutes earlier. She was standing near the hallway's vending machine, sipping water from a paper cup and chatting with two people. When she saw Greg, she offered a cautious smile. "Where'd you go?" He paused, not sure how to explain. "I took a wrong turn," he replied, forcing a smile. "Actually walked into the wrong room. Ended up, in some other meeting. I didn't want to just get up and leave right in the middle, so I stayed for a bit. I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner." Brenda tilted her head. "That's okay," she said, then lowered her voice. "You didn't barge in on something super confidential, did you?" He laughed nervously. "Probably," he admitted. "But they were really understanding. Everything okay on your end?" She nodded, eyes lighting up with relief. "Yes, it actually went pretty well. I was able to share a little bit. Everybody was very nice. It's good to hear other people feel the same kind of tension I do. They gave me some coping tips." Greg relaxed. "I'm glad. We can talk more about it in the car if you want." As they walked out to the parking lot, Brenda described how supportive the group leader had been, and how she felt oddly better just knowing she wasn't alone in experiencing intense anxiety. Greg listened attentively, nodding, occasionally murmuring, "That's great," while still replaying in his mind the things he'd heard in the wrong room. Later that evening, back at home, Brenda went to take a long bath and get ready for bed. Greg found himself alone in the living room, the hum of the air conditioning filling the silence. He turned on the TV but didn't really watch. His thoughts kept drifting back to the people he'd seen, the wide range of expressions on their faces, and the way they had spoken about feeling restricted by expectations, about the release they found in wearing what they felt drawn to. He remembered how one attendee, wearing a simple black skirt, had said that the clothes weren't just about style, but also about letting themselves breathe after years of feeling caged. There was a moment when Greg had caught a glimpse of his own faint reflection in a glass pane, and he wondered, could that be me? It wasn't that he'd never tried on anything deemed feminine. There had been fleeting moments in his life, though seldom. A couple times in college, as a joke, some friends had convinced him to wear a silly costume that included a skirt. He'd laughed it off, but there had been an odd spark of intrigue buried under the humor. Now, that spark seemed to have grown a bit brighter. The memory of how comfortable some of the group members had looked stayed with him. He didn't say anything about it to Brenda that night. She had enough on her plate coping with her own concerns, and he didn't want to add confusion. He told himself it was just a passing thought, a curiosity. He also felt uneasy acknowledging such a thing out loud. Yet in the days that followed, Greg found himself browsing the internet at odd hours, typing in search terms he never would have considered before. He read stories on forums, discovering just how many people explored wearing clothing outside typical expectations. Some posts were from individuals who had known from a young age that they enjoyed such attire. Others discovered it later in life. He found himself reading every word, taking note of the complexity and the range of emotions. He learned about the thrill, the nerves, the relief from stress that many reported. A recurring statement popped up. Wearing clothes that felt personally right could alleviate the weight of daily pressures. Greg paused more than once, feeling a magnetic pull to revisit that cross-dressing meeting. At the same time, he felt a flicker of fear. One afternoon when Brenda was at work, Greg opened his closet door. His reflection in the bedroom mirror was straightforward enough, a man in casual jeans and a collared shirt. He exhaled slowly. Then his eyes flicked to Brenda's side of the closet, where a few dresses and blouses hung. He had never considered actually trying them on before, but the memory of the group's comforting presence lingered. He closed the closet again, his heart thumping, telling himself not to be invasive. He didn't want to disrespect Brenda's space. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. He decided, at the very least, to look at them more closely. He felt a little sneaky, but he told himself he was just observing. Carefully, he touched the soft fabric of one of her blouses, then slid out a simple skirt with a modest length. He stared at it for a moment, then held it against his waist in front of the mirror. His shirt and socks clashed in a funny way, but something about the image caused his heartbeat to quicken. It was just a piece of fabric, yet he felt a swirl of exhilaration and unease. He put the skirt back almost immediately, half panicked. Then he paced around the room. "Am I going crazy?" he whispered to himself. He recalled the meeting, the gentle acceptance in that circle, how none of them seemed to judge each other. The longing within him grew more palpable, though he struggled to define it. Eventually he told himself, "Take it slow, one step at a time." A few days later, an opportunity arose. Brenda mentioned she was going to spend Saturday morning at a coffee shop to meet up with a new friend from her support group. She encouraged Greg to enjoy his own weekend time. He tried to appear casual as he said, "Sure, I'll just hang around at home, maybe watch a movie." Once she left, he felt his stomach flip with anticipation. He went straight to the closet. This time he selected that skirt again, plus a blouse that looked loose enough to fit him without stretching. He set them on the bed, his hands shaking. In the bright morning light, he slowly changed out of his usual clothes and put on the blouse and skirt. The fabric felt strange against his skin, particularly around his shoulders. He had to wiggle around to get the skirt sitting right at his waist. The reflection staring back from the mirror seemed alien, but it gave him a rush. He stood there, uncertain what to do next, but the pounding in his ears told him that this was something he had yearned to explore, perhaps without even admitting it to himself. His heart was pounding. He walked around the bedroom a bit, noticing how the skirt moved around his legs. It felt airy, different, somehow comforting. A part of him felt silly. He was a man in a borrowed skirt, but another part felt free, in a way he hadn't realized he'd been missing. He didn't push it too far. After a minute or two, he changed back, carefully folding Brenda's clothes and returning them to their places, hoping she wouldn't notice anything amiss. Then he sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaling shakily. A wave of relief and wonder washed over him. For the rest of that day, he felt a sense of anticipation he couldn't quite name. It was like he'd unlocked a door he had avoided opening. At the same time, he was anxious. He loved Brenda. He respected her deeply, and he didn't want to hide things. But he also feared how she might react if she knew he had tried on her clothes. In the following weeks, he found small excuses to slip into something from Brenda's closet whenever she was out. He didn't do it frequently, partially because of the guilt, but also because he wanted to savor it in small doses. Each time, the newness excited him, though he would quickly change back and double-check that everything was in the exact place it had been. Meanwhile, Brenda's anxiety group became a weekly occurrence. She grew more open about what she experienced there, telling Greg about the stories she heard and the coping strategies they recommended. She was beginning to manage her tension more effectively. Greg, for his part, listened attentively, offering any support he could. Sometimes she asked, "Are you okay? You seem preoccupied." He would give a vague answer, "Just busy with work, I guess," or "A lot on my mind." He didn't have the courage to reveal his secret. His concern was that sharing something so personal might overshadow her progress. He reasoned, "She's dealing with enough stress. I can't drop this on her right now." But the longing didn't vanish. In fact, it deepened. Late at night, he would lie in bed, thinking about that cross-dressing meeting, remembering the empathetic glances passed between members. He started to wonder if they still met at the same time in that same room each week. Part of him wanted to go back, not by accident, but by choice, to see how they were doing, maybe to learn more about himself in the process. His chance came unexpectedly when Brenda mentioned a shift in her group's schedule due to a schedule conflict. Instead of meeting on Thursdays, they were switching to Mondays, at least for a while. Greg realized that the cross-dressing group might still meet on the original evening. A seed of an idea formed in his mind. On a Thursday night, he told Brenda, "I think I might go check out something at the community center." She raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you mention you walked into the wrong group last time?" His heart kicked up. "Yeah, but I heard there might be other meetings that could be interesting. I just want to see if maybe there's something worth attending, like a new perspective or something." Brenda seemed curious, but she also trusted him. "Okay," she said. "Have fun." He arrived at the community center, his palms sweaty, and walked down the hallway to where he remembered the cross-dressing group had met. The same sign was affixed to the door, and through the little window he could see a few people gathering inside. This time he made a conscious choice. He opened the door and stepped in before he could lose his nerve. A few familiar faces recognized him. The tall group leader smiled warmly. "Welcome back," they said. "Nice to see you again. Grab a seat anywhere you like." Greg felt his chest tighten, but he found a place in the circle. He nodded greetings at some of the members, who returned the nod with encouraging grins. This time he wasn't an accidental visitor. He was there willingly. As the meeting began, the leader brought up topics from the previous week. Some people had tried new outfits, some had tested their courage outside the house, and some had discovered fresh ways to style their hair. Greg listened intently, drawn in by the simple sincerity. Eventually, someone turned to him and asked, "How has it been for you? Did you get a chance to reflect on anything since we saw you?" Greg felt every set of eyes. He inhaled slowly. "Yes, I did. Actually, I've been thinking a lot. I guess it's still really new to me, but I realize there might be an interest or a side of me that I haven't explored." The group members were patient, letting him find the words. He took another breath. "I never thought I'd be here, but I tried on some clothes, at home, and it felt surprisingly comfortable." A gentle wave of understanding and empathy floated through the circle. He caught the leader's soft smile. Another attendee leaned forward. "Is it scary?" they asked. Greg nodded. "A little, yes, and I also feel guilty. My wife doesn't know. She's got her own stress, and I'm not sure how to share this with her. But I can't deny it. There's something about dressing in that way that feels like a release, I guess." They spoke in hushed, supportive voices. Someone shared how they had told a partner after years of secrecy and how it wasn't easy, but it eventually led to more openness. Another person explained that, in their case, they kept it private because their partner was uncomfortable with it. Not everyone's situation was the same, but they all acknowledged the courage it took to even recognize what one wanted. Greg swallowed when he heard these stories. He didn't know if he had that kind of bravery, but hearing about others gave him hope that there was some path forward. Over the next few meetings, he joined the group regularly, slipping out of the house with half-truths to Brenda about being busy at the community center. He knew that eventually he would have to share his secret, but a part of him was biding time, mustering the strength to speak openly. Each meeting offered new insights. He learned about practical tips, how to choose clothes that fit his frame, how to walk with more ease in items he wasn't accustomed to wearing, how to calm the pounding heart when someone might notice. Above all, he was impressed by the respect everyone showed one another. At home, he grew more bold in private. He ordered a few inexpensive items online, a skirt, a pair of leggings, a soft sweater, and hid them behind boxes in the garage so Brenda wouldn't stumble across them. On the nights she worked late or went to see her friends from group, he would slip into the clothes, feeling a strange mix of calm and excitement. There was a night, however, when Brenda came home earlier than expected. Greg was in the bedroom, wearing the skirt and sweater, when he heard her footsteps in the hallway. He nearly tripped trying to remove the clothes fast enough, his heart pounding. He managed to shove them into a laundry hamper and throw on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt right as she walked in. She smiled, none the wiser. "Hey," she said cheerfully, "I'm home sooner than I thought." He nodded, forcing a grin. "Just hanging out. How was your night?" She curled up next to him, and he tried not to let his jitters show. The close call rattled him, and it highlighted that he couldn't keep this up forever. The secrecy felt heavier each day, even as he found comfort in the clothing. In the back of his mind, he kept remembering how the group had spoken of honesty, how important it could be in maintaining trust. He weighed the risk. Brenda might be confused or upset, or she might interpret it as a betrayal that he hadn't told her sooner. Yet the alternative felt worse, continuing to sneak around. Days turned into weeks. One evening, after Brenda had returned from her support group, she approached him in the living room. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked. There was a seriousness to her tone that made him stand up from the couch. "Of course," he said, guiding her to sit down next to him. She fiddled with the hem of her shirt. "You've seemed distant," she began. "I've been telling you all about my group, and you listen, which I appreciate. But whenever I ask about your time at the community center, you get vague." Greg's mouth went dry. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to worry you." She looked into his eyes. "Are you seeing another group? One that you don't want to tell me about?" His heart lurched. "What makes you say that?" "I guess I noticed you've been going on the same evenings I used to go. But now that my group meets a different day, you still go on Thursdays. I also found a piece of clothing in the laundry hamper that clearly isn't mine, but it's feminine. I wondered if you picked it up by accident or something else." He felt the room spin. She had discovered a piece of clothing he must have accidentally left behind. Panic flashed across his face, and she saw it. "Greg," she whispered, putting a hand on his arm. "It's okay. Just tell me what's going on." He breathed in, feeling the weight of all his hidden moments. In a trembling voice, he began to explain. He told her about walking into the wrong meeting that first night, how he had intended to find her in room 102, but instead found a cross-dressing support group. He described how he'd stayed because it felt awkward to leave, and how their stories had stirred something in him he hadn't anticipated. He spoke of the clothing at home, his curiosity that turned into discreet experimentation, and his fear of telling her. He didn't use the words that had come up in the group countless times, but he conveyed that it was something that felt intensely personal, that he had been longing for a sense of relief from everyday pressures, and this gave him that sense of calm. Brenda listened quietly, her eyes shining with a mix of surprise and empathy. Occasionally she'd nod or gently squeeze his hand, encouraging him to continue. He was stunned by how intently she hung on to every detail. When he finally finished, breathing heavily, as though he'd just run a marathon, she let the silence linger for a moment. "I wish you'd told me sooner," she said softly. "I'm not angry. I'm just a little shocked, but I'm not upset with you. I'm more concerned that you've been struggling alone." He bowed his head, tears pricking the corners of his eyes. "I was worried you'd think it was weird, or that it might add more stress to your life, especially when you're dealing with anxiety and trying to manage everything." She exhaled slowly. "I won't pretend I understand it all completely yet, but I get that it's important to you. You're my husband, and I care about you. I don't want you to feel like you have to hide anything that brings you peace." He let out a shuddering breath, relief washing over him. "Thank you," he whispered, voice wavering. "I was so terrified." Brenda moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "We can figure this out," she said. "I might have questions, and we might need time to adjust, but you stood by me when I decided to join an anxiety group. I'm not going to turn my back on you for finding something that makes you feel good." They held each other, letting the weight of the admission sink in. Greg felt tears slip down his cheeks, and Brenda gently wiped them away. There was an unspoken understanding in that moment, though he didn't know exactly how their lives would shift. In the days that followed, They talked more openly. Brenda asked about the group. She asked what Greg felt when he wore certain clothes. He struggled to articulate it, but he tried to explain that it was an outlet, a chance to breathe differently than he could in his normal routine. They decided to lay ground rules about the shared closet. "If you want to try my clothes, just let me know which ones," Brenda said shyly one morning. "I mean, I don't mind, but maybe we can figure out what fits you and what doesn't." Greg felt his heart swell, grateful beyond words. "I'd like that," he managed. The first time they tried it together, it was a quiet afternoon. Brenda showed him a few tops she thought might fit him loosely. He tried them on, and she offered gentle feedback. "That color looks nice on you," or "This one's a bit tight in the shoulders." She didn't make a big show of it. She didn't laugh or tease him. She simply helped him in small ways. It wasn't instant comfort. Both of them had moments of awkwardness and second-guessing. There were times Brenda looked at him, blinking a bit more than usual, as if seeing a side of him she never anticipated. There were times Greg felt too self-conscious to walk in front of her in a skirt. But they were trying. He still went to the cross-dressing group on Thursdays, though he no longer needed to hide it. Brenda even joined him once, sitting in on the session to get a sense of the community that Greg had stumbled across. She was struck by how calm everyone seemed, how supportive they were, much like her own anxiety group. It was an evening that left a strong impression on both of them. During that session, a couple of participants told Brenda about their personal experiences in navigating close relationships. Some partners had been thrilled from the start. Some had needed time to adjust. Others were uncertain forever. Brenda listened with an open mind. She admitted she felt uncertain too, but she was determined to stand by Greg. In the car ride home that night, Brenda rested a hand on his thigh. "I'm proud of you for being honest," she murmured. "It was a lot for both of us to handle, but I feel closer to you now." He smiled at her in the dim glow of the streetlights. "I feel the same way," he said. They continued this journey, both discovering aspects of themselves they hadn't explored before. Brenda learning ways to manage her anxious thinking, Greg finding ways to incorporate an expression of himself through clothing. Their conversations grew deeper. Sometimes Brenda had a tough day and asked for emotional support. Sometimes Greg felt overwhelmed about what this cross-dressing exploration would mean long-term. At times, Brenda's anxiety flared up, leading to sleepless nights. Greg would hold her, whispering that everything was going to be all right. Other times, Greg wrestled with an internal war of shame or worry, and Brenda would talk him through it patiently. Their marriage shifted, but in many ways, it strengthened through these open discussions. Months passed, and Greg continued to attend the cross-dressing support group. He built friendships, learning from others who had navigated similar paths. He tried out a new style of clothing from time to time, discovering what he liked. He even ventured outside the house once for an evening walk in a pair of Brenda's leggings and an oversized sweater, feeling adrenaline and relief mingle as he strolled under the streetlights. Brenda took note of his calmer demeanor afterward. She teased him gently. "You seem so light on your feet," she said with a faint grin. He grinned back. "I guess I feel lighter, yeah." Though they never shouted it from the rooftops, they embraced a private, supportive approach. Brenda's anxiety group helped her find tools to cope with her worries, and Greg's attendance at the cross-dressing group allowed him a chance to learn about himself in ways he hadn't before. One evening, as they relaxed in the living room with cups of tea, Brenda mused aloud, "Isn't it strange how we sometimes stumble into exactly what we need without even realizing it?" Greg looked at her, remembering the day he'd walked into the wrong room by accident. He recalled the wave of embarrassment he'd felt, and how that moment had unexpectedly unlocked a part of him he never knew was waiting to be acknowledged. "That day at the community center," he said, "I was so scared when I realized I'd made a mistake. But it turned out I'm really glad I did. Brenda nodded, a soft smile touching her lips as she placed her hand over his. I am too, she said quietly. They stayed that way, hands gently linked, tea growing cold as they gazed at each other with the shared understanding that life was unpredictable, sometimes messy, sometimes astonishing. They had found a new depth in their relationship, a new horizon in who they each were. Though it would continue to shift and evolve, they knew they would face each challenge and each triumph side by side. Perhaps that was the strangest and most wonderful outcome of Greg's accidental detour into the wrong room at the community center. In a single misplaced step, he discovered not just a new community, but a part of his own identity he had never given serious thought. More than that, he found reassurance that his marriage could hold space for both his wife's challenges and his own personal revelations. Months later, they remained at each other's side, continuing to learn and to connect in ways they hadn't before that fateful evening. Brenda's anxiety had not evaporated, and Greg's exploration of clothing was not something he flaunted publicly all the time. But within the refuge of their home, with its slightly peeling wallpaper and comfortable worn couch, they found intimacy and honesty. On a quiet Sunday, Greg woke to find Brenda already up, cooking breakfast. He shuffled into the kitchen, noticing she'd set out a small stack of folded clothes for him on the table, a pair of soft leggings and a sweater he recognized from his own collection. She had even placed an unopened shade of lip balm next to them, something that had a faint tint. She looked up from the stovetop, smiling shyly. I bought a couple of things for you. I thought you might like to try them out. He felt his cheeks grow warm. Thank you, he said, touched by the gesture. She turned off the burner and came over to stand with him. We're going to be okay, you know. He nodded, arms encircling her waist. Yeah, I believe we will be. Outside, the sun lit up the new day. In many ways, life would go on as usual, errands, bills, weekend chores. Yet within those ordinary routines lay a profound sense that their bond had grown strong enough to endure challenges and transformations. Greg could still recall the swirl of embarrassment in that meeting room. But looking back, it no longer felt like a nightmare, more like a pivotal moment he wouldn't trade for anything. He helped Brenda set the table, and they ate together while the warm morning light fell across them. Their quiet conversation drifted from her next support group session to the idea of him meeting up with his new friends in the crossdressing group for coffee someday. She offered suggestions on comfortable walking shoes he might wear if he wanted to experiment with them. Their voices remained hushed and affectionate, a tender hush that spoke of compassion. And in that gentle hush, a seed that had once been planted on a night when Greg walked into the wrong room continued to grow, nourished by mutual care. Even as life's difficulties pressed on them, they found relief in the simple act of listening and being present for each other's journeys. The path ahead was uncertain, but they were certain of each other, and that, they both felt, was more than enough.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.